What a long, strange journey it's been to get Tron into the Disney theme parks. The first Tron film, released in 1982, was supposed to be a revolutionary new type of film using a lot of interesting visual techniques. Definitely changed the game in a lot of ways, but one way it didn't was as far as box office success. It was not a hit. It didn't go over as well as the company had hoped, and it failed to rejuvenate the studio in the way they had planned it. Nonetheless, they thought it might, and so some theme park tie-ins happened or were planned, right? So aboard the Disneyland People Mover, you could experience the Tron Speed Tunnel when the People Mover went through the Carousel Theater. That actually happened. And then what didn't happen was a Tron arcade at Epcot Center in Communicore. That never happened. And so the film was released, wasn't a huge hit. The video game, though, the arcade game, was a smash hit, super successful, and sort of kept the franchise alive a bit. But what really did was a horde of very passionate fans. It was definitely a cult hit, and there were plenty of people who loved Tron. They were out there, and they kept it alive. Alive enough that in the 2000s, when Bob Iger comes in as CEO, the decision is made, we're going to try Tron again. We're going to make a sequel all these years later in 2010 called Tron Legacy. This regime, of course, is very, very sure that they can succeed where the first Tron did not and make Tron a franchise for the company. So they immediately, again, embark on some theme park offerings. First of all, at Walt Disney World, there was the Tronorail. It was a monorail wrap that went along all the different monorail lines for a little while when the film was released. And then at Disney California Adventure, you could experience Electronica, which had Laser Man, this guy who had this fantastic laser light act. There was dancing and music, and Flynn's Arcade. We could actually get little Flynn's Arcade tokens. They're pretty neat. And actually, funny enough, today for my first Tron Lightcycle run ride, I wore my Electronica shirt, which I don't want to put any further because it's not looking great these days. It is 13 years old, and it has been worn many, many times. But nonetheless, so obviously behind the scenes, there is larger stuff happening. There are plans for more exciting Tron-style attractions. In fact, at Disneyland and Tomorrowland, as a way to bring the People Mover track back to life, they start to work on a light bike type ride, which at certain points wasn't really even a Tron thing. But the concept is started, and funny enough, we still don't have a new Tomorrowland at Disneyland, and this was back in like 2008, they started cooking this thing up. But the idea really stuck with people of doing this like fast speed light bike attraction. And obviously when you think of something like that, you think of Tron, right? And so they start thinking about a high speed Tron ride. Obviously the movie doesn't do quite as well as they thought. It kind of shelves the ride for the Magic Kingdom at least. But there is another park in development at this time for the Walt Disney Company, and it's another Bob Iger endeavor, and that would be Shanghai Disneyland, which was going to be, I think Bob Iger looked at it a lot the way he looks at Disney Plus. That's his legacy, right? His legacy is that was the park he got to build, the resort he got to build. Disney Plus was his big endeavor, getting them into streaming. Those are the highlights of his time as CEO. And so Shanghai, they really were planning to go all out, and they really wanted to change the park, re-envision what a castle park was. And so I think everyone kind of looked at each other, was like, well, I don't think we're going to do Space Mountain again. Could we do something different? And someone looked over at those Tron Lightcycle plans and was like, could we do that? And surprisingly, even though the movie was not a smash hit, it was decided that a Tron roller coaster would be a worthy replacement for Space Mountain at Shanghai Disneyland. And so Shanghai Disneyland is built with the ride, much to the amazement of every fan in the United States who can't believe that not only is a Tron ride being built, but the misfortune that it'll be built on the other side of the world, very far away from us. And part of that is several Disney IPs do not necessarily matter in mainland China. They don't really, like, they're not big on Star Wars, for that matter. And so with the case of Tron, they're like, you know, Shanghai is this futuristic city, and we need to do something that looks futuristic even to them in this modern city. And so these light up motorcycles going into the computer, the digital world, probably works really well. It'll probably resonate with this crowd. And so They made it happen. TRON Lightcycle Run opens with Shanghai Disneyland in June of 2016. And of course, we all sit there and watch and are like, but when can we have it? And I think everyone was hoping and praying that a third Tron movie would get made and light a fire under the company to do Tron once again. Well, it wasn't a long time later that we would find out that Tron was on the way to Walt Disney World. In fact, in the early summer of 2017 at WDWNT.com, we broke the rumor that Tron Lightcycle Run was planned for the Magic Kingdom. And just a few short days later, it was officially announced by Bob Chapek. Remember him, kids? Officially announced by him at the 2017 D23 Expo. It's coming to Walt Disney World. We were going to have it in time for the 50th anniversary celebration. If only we can go back and warn ourselves in 2017 of what was going to happen between the pandemic and Bob Chapek, both viruses. Anyway, I digress. And so Tron starts to be constructed. They start clearing land in 2018, and it's coming to Walt Disney World Magic Kingdom, where, funny enough, it's going to live next door to this guy. It's going to be right next door to Space Mountain. And the planned opening is October 1st, 2021, at the beginning of the Walt Disney World 50th anniversary celebration. Well, I don't really need to tell you the rest, but I will in case someone's watching this in the distant future, maybe where this is all a memory. But in March of 2020, the Walt Disney World theme parks closed due to the COVID-19 pandemic. Construction is halted on Tron. Sadly, a lot of people who worked on Tron were let go from the company in Imagineering. And so Tron is kind of stalled. Tron is one of the projects they decided to sort of slow down on, more so even than some other rides that were supposed to open a little earlier, right? Remy's Ratatouille Adventure was supposed to be a 2020 offering, as was Harmonious at Epcot. Those both ended up getting held for the 50th anniversary anyway, and then the stuff that was supposed to open, particularly with the 50th in 2021, which would be Cosmic Rewind and Tron, among other things that either got canceled or we're still waiting on. Those two things got pushed off a little more, right? So Guardians eventually opens in May of 2022, in the middle of the 50th. And in the case of Tron, they decide to raise the white flag and decide Tron will not be a part of Walt Disney World's 50th anniversary. And they make a very deliberate statement to that in announcing eventually its opening date would be a few days after the official end of the world's most magical celebration, which ends at the end of March. Tron will officially open on April 4th, 2023. But at that point, finally, in the US, after all these decades, there will be a Tron ride where you get to ride a light cycle in the United States Disney theme parks. It's a pretty exciting journey. So I was lucky enough to be invited by a very nice cast member, very sweet guy, to preview Tron Lightcycle Run at the Magic Kingdom, and that means it's time for Tom's Honest Review. So a few quick things before we get rolling into this. Yes, we call all of these honest reviews because we are not on the media list. We don't have anyone telling us what to say. We at WDWNT, when it comes to hotel reviews, dining, whatever the case may be, we spend our own money to bring you an honest review of those things. And our ride reviews are no different. If you've not seen one of these before, we have a couple recent ones you may have missed. Number one, I did an honest third review and rant, I would say, about Star Wars Galactic Star Cruiser. So we now have 3 of those for you to watch, and I think the third one's especially poignant. We have some interesting topics to cover there. And also, we just recently covered Mickey and Minnie's Runaway Railway at Disneyland in our honest review. So go back and check those out if you missed those, but let's talk about what we're here for, which is Tron. So I have been on this before. I went to Shanghai, not for the grand opening. We went in March of 2019. And I know there are tons of people who've been to Shanghai Disney. A lot of people went in the first year. A lot of people went for the grand opening, at least in the, fan community. People that we talk to or run into, people that run in this circle, if you will. And everyone's like, oh, it was great. We loved the park, blah, 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 blah. And so we were very excited to go. In the spring of 2019, I felt like it was a very different experience in that park. I did not see what I think other people did. I think maintenance had really ravaged the place. I think it was starting to look run down. A lot of things had changed, right? So they opened with all these rides that had exclusive merchandise. And by the time we got there, everything had gone generic. Everything was just Shanghai Disney logo merchandise with characters. They'd got rid of everything for Roaring Rapids, had a bunch of merchandise with the Karak, an original character, all that stuff. There was one ride, only one attraction in the entire park had held on to its exclusive merchandise. And it happened to be TRON, which I think says a lot for the aesthetic of TRON, in that out of everything in that park that had its own merchandise, this was the only attraction they were willing to still stock its merchandise at. And it says a lot for the strength of the franchise, right? Even if people don't particularly love the movies, the aesthetic and the visuals and the music really work in a theme park environment, right? And this brings us back to sort of like Avatar, right? Avatar was not everyone's favorite film. At least that's what people say. I don't know. It's not my favorite film. I like the second one better, but they're not, in all, they're not my favorite film franchise, right? But as a theme park land, because it is a visually stunning film with interesting characters and interesting creatures and, you know, a solid soundtrack, that translates really well into the theme park world. That's kind of all you need. Because in the theme park world, you don't really need to captivate people for 3.5 hours like James Cameron does in a movie theater. You just kind of have to engage people for the time they're in the queue and on the ride and in the land. That's how you have to engage people. And people are also, you know, engaged at their own speed. They decide how they take it in, what they want to look at, what they want to explore, what they don't, where they want to eat, what they want to buy, all those kinds of things. TRON is another one of those things where even if you don't like the movie, the aesthetic, the visuals, and especially the music from TRON Legacy are phenomenal. And there is no doubt that people that do not even like these films would be excited to step into an area that looks like it's right out of the movie, right? Where there are light cycles flying by and a canopy of blue laser lights and that Daft Punk score pumping in. That if you don't enjoy that, you check your pulse, you may not be alive. And so again, similar to Avatar, I think TRON is another one of those franchises where they make that third movie and no one goes to see it. It doesn't matter. The ride will continue to be successful just based on the aesthetic and the music. And so we went to Shanghai and the park wasn't great, but one of the few things we love, well, Peter Pan, the ropes course thing, and TRON were the highlights. TRON was super fun. It's sort of a modern, it's basically a modern Space Mountain, right, with an outdoor portion. You know, modern audiences, what they think about a great roller coaster, right, is high speed, high speed thrills, right? So Velocicoaster's been a great success. Hagrid's, both of those at Universal, they are attractions with multiple launches. That's I don't know. That's kind of one of the industry standards now. Is either you're building something like Steel Vengeance at Cedar Point, where it's just wild, big vertical drops and a lot of inversions and that kind of stuff. Or this is the other, or you go for speed, right? And I think in the realm of Disney and Universal, you can only, I think as far as thrill level, you can only go so far, right? Because you do have a family audience, more so with Hagrid than Velocicoaster. But Hagrid's and TRON, again, it has to be a little more accessible to more people than something like Velocicoaster or a Steel Vengeance would be. And so anyway, so the modern take on Space Mountain, right? It's still a roller coaster in the dark, but obviously things have changed in the world. We can do really cool projections inside the building. And the other cool thing that would be really neat is we do a launch over a path of people. Something that even, funny enough, I mean, Slinky Dog Dash was supposed to have moments where it went over the guest pathways in Toy Story Land. If you look at the original concept art, that was supposed to be a thing. And I think that would have gone, like Toy Story Land, again, not one of my favorite projects. I think that would have gone a long way to excite people. I think there's something incredibly exciting about being sort of in the middle of the ride and watching the trains go by, and that kinetic energy is unrivaled. And so in the case of TRON, they knew they had to. They were like, this ride can't, I know we're supposed to be in the grid, but we can't. We got to go outside, right? We've got to give you a high-speed launch to outside and then bring you back in. And that works really well. Obviously, the ride is better at night because the canopy lights up and you can see the lights on the light cycles more. It's way more thrilling at night. It's still a good attraction in the day, but at night it really, I guess, pun intended, shines, you could say. Anyway. So Tron again. One of the highlights in Shanghai. So people kept asking me over the last. It's been 4 years since I went to Shanghai. Believe it or not, I don't know where time went. And obviously, people are like, you've been on it. What do you think of it? And my review would always be, I think Tron is a lot of fun. It's very short, but it's really fun, and you can't help but get caught up in the excitement of that world. Like again, that aesthetic is very pleasing. It is a cool, black walls with bright blue lights is always going to look good, with a lot of mirrors and glass, and it's I can't fathom anyone will walk through this building and just not be pleased and not have a smile on their face. That would be really hard to believe that someone wasn't at least pleased by that part of it. Trust me, there are things to not be pleased with, and this is an honest review. So with all the good, we're going to nitpick, because that's what we do as fans. That's the fun part of what we do, is dissecting this thing and seeing what works and what doesn't. And we'll get to that in a bit. So, so my review I always told people is it's really fun. I think you'll love it. And the other part I'd always sneak in there was they are going to have tremendous loading problems for a number of reasons. And it wasn't just some people are going to have trouble fitting. If you guys watch News Today, a couple weeks ago, I already talked about this. And I've been talking about it since we got back from Shanghai. There are some body dimension issues where some people aren't going to be able to ride. And we're not talking about, in all cases, we're not talking about super extreme body types. All right, that's in some cases, yes, that obviously is a problem. But there are some cases where I think people are, I wouldn't say super extreme, but we'll get more into that in a minute. That's going to be number one problem. Number two problem is just it's going to take people so long to figure out how to get into this thing. It is the most complicated Disney ride to board in history. It makes Flight of Passage look like, what's the easiest Disney ride to get into? I don't even know. I'm trying to think of what's like the least cumbersome Disney attraction to load into. I wouldn't even say Small World, because you got to like step down to the boat and Pirates. Where's something like Haunted Mansion? Right? It's definitely not Haunted Mansion. It's not going to be that easy, and it makes Flight of Passage look like Haunted Mansion, I think, as far as load procedures. Because at least in Flight of Passage, they tell you like, squat like you're going to ride a bike and then push forward, right? In this case, you can't do that because the back of the bike is so tall. So you're not coming from the back of the bike and then sitting on it. No. In this case, you have to step over, right? So there are going to be people that fit on the ride. Some people with a little less mobility, I think, are going to have problems just loading into this. The other thing that's crazy is, again, another thing that doesn't happen in the Disney theme park realm, people crossing a vehicle to the other side to load into a ride. So what happens is, on this attraction, there are two light cycles directly next to each other that make up a row. So in the load station, very different from any other load station, when they send you to row 3, there are 2 row 3s. Why are there 2 row 3s? Because you are supposed to go side by side with the other person you're riding with. And so those gates will open, and the person on the left is going to get onto that first light cycle. The person on the right is going to walk across the vehicle to the other side of the platform, a thing that would shut down almost every other theme park ride ever built. But you're going to cross to that side and then go through what, again, is one of the more complicated loading processes in theme park history, in that you are going to put your leg over the other side of the vehicle into sort of there's a little box, essentially, which keeps your foot from leaving the vehicle into the box. But then you have to lean your leg. So let's say this is the thing that's going to hold your calf, right? It's sitting there. It might even be like this when you first get in. I can't remember. But your leg is going to go into this thing. Your leg is going to end up, your calf is going to end up like that, right? With your foot. This is your foot. Your calf is facing the ground, right? It is, what's the word I'm looking for? There's a word here. when something's right above another thing, they're like even. Parallel, thank you. So now that I've remembered what words are, your calf is going to be parallel to the ground by the time you're in this thing correctly. Your thigh is basically in this like pocket above that, and you are leaning over onto this thing, and a back portion, a back piece with the identity disc on it is going to come down on your back. It's not hard. I'm sorry I slammed on the desk. Doesn't hit you that hard. I want to assure you that's not a problem. And so you're I would almost say like a manta or something like that. You're almost like a flying coaster. You're almost in that position, but not quite. You're halfway between a regular roller coaster and like a flying coaster like Manta, Flying Dinosaur, Superman. I could try to name several from other parks, but Disney doesn't have any. So you're somewhere between those two seating arrangements, basically, as far as how far you are facing the ground. And so the dimension problems, number one, if you have an extreme torso size, I think that may have some effect, but that is a far lesser effect than leg size. I think leg size is probably the problem more people are going to run into. I'm not telling you that torso size doesn't matter, because it does to an extent, but leg size is going to matter. If your thighs can't really get in, if your calves can't get into that section either, where then a metal bar comes behind your calf, a really restrictive metal bar, which today, it definitely hit the back of my calf. I know there were some people I rode with in Shanghai where it was a little tight on their calf, to where when they got off there was like a little white line. They weren't in pain, but there was a white line, like it was applying pressure on their calf for sure. And I'm sure that's going to happen here to some people. But yeah, that bar I think is a majority of the issue. But the bar is also important to keeping your leg in the vehicle, right? So is this a master class in roller coaster train design? Not necessarily, but right, there was a hard thing to accomplish, right? And it was, we need to make people get on a light cycle, and it needs to feel like they're riding a light cycle. And the solution was, yeah, we have this somewhat restrictive vehicle, but in the back of the train we can have the light runner car, right? So that'll accommodate anyone and everyone. And so the problem they're having is, I believe, I didn't get to fact check this today, I should have. I believe half of the trains have the car. I believe half of them have the car. So cast members were reporting during earlier previews that people are waiting up to 30 minutes for the car. Extra 30 minutes for the car, right? And so there, I think, are some concerns that could be a thing, right? So if you are not accommodated by the vehicle, you may have a very, very long wait, extended wait, to ride in that car, to have what is essentially a lesser experience. Anyway, I haven't ridden in the car yet. I don't know. We only got to ride once today. That was the limit. I'm going to try to get in the car at some point, but then again, I also really don't want to slow down anyone that wants to ride in the car. So we'll see. Maybe I'll go with someone who, I know we have some people that want to go who don't necessarily think they'll make it into the bike, or have some mobility issues where they don't really even want to try to step over the bike for that matter. So I'll try to go with those people instead of holding up the line because I want to try something. So they have the car. They think that's the solution. I think we're going to have to wait and see how bad the line for the car is. If the line for the car, the light runner, remains long or gets longer than that, then I think they're probably going to have to get more of them and put them on every train, which was originally what I had heard that they were talking about putting on all of them, and then they didn't do that in the end. I guess they thought it was overkill. That maybe we don't need quite that many of the car. But either way, we're going to have to wait and see how that shakes out. April 4th is not that far away, and we're going to see what that line looks like. Definitely saw a couple of people get turned away today, but not a ton. I don't think there was a ton of people today who didn't make it. But I will tell you, we waited 5 minutes for the test seats, because I mean, we knew we were going to fit, but I wanted to do the test seats and get a photo. And some of the people in front of us were testing it to see if they actually fit. Some people were just doing it for a photo op, which is the intent of it anyway. You can do that. But there was a little bit of a queue. I think word has traveled fast about the Tron vehicle and if it's accommodating or not. And again, we're very early in this thing, but everything I've been saying to you guys for the last couple of years, especially the last couple of months on the show, there's going to be some load problems. Whether it's people just figuring out crossing the vehicle and getting to the other side and putting their leg over and all of that, right? Because you've seen it at Flight of Passage. You have inevitably sat in a Flight of, if you've been on it more than once, you've inevitably sat in that room for Flight of Passage and heard that whirring sound for 5 full minutes while you hear someone, whether it's in your room, in a room above or below you, where you hear like the cast member keep trying to get them in to the thing, right? And so I think there's going to be some of that, but some of it's just going to be the fact that it is not an easy thing to get into. I think Flight of Passage, once you see it and you try to situate yourself in it, you can get in on your own. Whether it closes or not is another thing. Getting into the TRON Lightcycle is a little bit of a fight. You got to lining your legs up and all of that stuff takes a moment, and then you got to pull the bars in to bring the back down, and then so to check it on other rides, you do this, right? Could you push the lap bar for me? And this one you're situated like this, so you end up like shaking yourself violently as you test the lap bar in this case, which are these handles that control the back lock essentially, and also actually control the leg locks too. It's all one big. It's an impressive mechanism, right? They're cool vehicles. They are beautiful. They look like they've jumped off the screen. They're very, very cool. And in an effort to provide that, there are some restrictions, right? And so at least there is a vehicle. At least people can get on this. I am wildly curious as to if the car is even worth it. I guess if it's the only way you can ride, you don't even know what you're missing. But like the thrill of TRON Lightcycle Run is being on the light cycle. It's not even so much your surroundings. Because I will tell you, especially this opening after Guardians puts it in a bad spot, right? It's still going to be loved. People are still going to have fun on it. But the inevitable comparisons are going to be made between this and Guardians. And Guardians, I think, as far as the projections inside, is a little more impressive. And the TRON projection effects feel a little older. They definitely feel like they're an older generation, a generation before Cosmic Rewind. They're not bad. They work, right? But there's some interesting moments where it's like the light cycle's kind of racing alongside you, and there's a mirror on the other side, so it fills out the scene. And that happens on some bank turns towards the end of the ride. But it still works. I mean, you go through a bunch of gates. There's a lot of these light up gates you go through. But to give you a breakdown of the ride, I think let's start at the beginning. Number one, the approach here at Walt Disney World. If you come from Tomorrowland, which is probably the intended approach, you can come from Storybook Circus if you'd like to. There is a path sort of goes around, and then you can come back up that long ramp when you get towards the Tomorrowland side. You still got to go up that ramp no matter what. You got this long winding ramp with the Tron sign on the ground and the canopy there, and it's very cool. And it is this long approach. You work your way up this long ramp. And it's I like the approach a lot because you go out to the right side. You go through the middle of the coaster track first. You're under the canopy. The trains are going by. There's all this energy. And you go out to the side. What's cool about that side is you're still seeing the trains launch. But then as you come out that side, I know there's a bunch of umbrellas there, which it's not covered. I wouldn't have wanted to cover it either because there's this really cool view of Space Mountain and Bay Lake Tower at the Contemporary. And they match really nicely with the aesthetic of TRON Lightcycle Run. It feels so natural, and it's this nice blending of the Tomorrowland of the 70s with the Tomorrowland of today, and they work together in harmony. It's such a cool view of space sitting right there. It fills out, because in Shanghai, that approach, it's really just like a metal fence and then the TRON building, and then you could see the top of the, it's called RC Racer in Hong Kong and Paris, but I forget, it's like Rex's Racer or something in Shanghai. It's the big orange track for the RC car coaster that just goes up and down. And that's just sitting there right in the prime viewing space as you approach the entrance of the ride. And it's like, oh, that's not great. The approach visuals here, much, much better, much cleaner, and all make sense. It is a big canopy, right? So that first section of queue is just a white canopy. It doesn't really, to me, feel like a Disney ride queue, that portion. It reminds me of like a Cedar Fair or something like that. But then once you go inside, it gets a little more Disney for sure. So a bit of an improvement. The first room of queue, well, first of all, the first one of the few props built for the attraction is out in that covered canopied queue section. They have the big, I forget the name of the thing. It's the device that essentially has sent people into the grid in the film, right? And so in Tron Legacy, Kevin Flynn gets, I believe that's his name. I haven't seen the movie in a while. Gets zapped into the grid by that device. So it's there and it's making noise and lighting up to essentially say, we're zapping you into the grid now. That first room's a little different. They did a whole new thing. I think in Shanghai it's mostly black walls, maybe with a little bit of light. But in this case, they've done this neat little corridor of blue lights in the wall. Hard to explain, but it looks cool in person. And that leads you into the pre-show room. I don't know what else to call it. I think it's got to be a pre-show, essentially. I mean, it doesn't last super long, but it's really neat. It's this little room with what looks like a wall of projections in front of you, projections on glass. And there's this little projection show. And then the glass magically becomes opaque and reveals the launch area of the ride, which is for me is the coolest scene top to bottom. The room is gorgeous. The room where it most feels like you're really in the grid. And that reveal is perfect. The reveal, especially when it times with the light cycle zooming out. And then you get to walk around that room in a full circle. There's an identity disc on the wall, and it's just, the room is perfection. The lighting, the way it's staged, everything about that particular room is wonderful. Then you have some more normal queue. There's like a room that's kind of just a box with light and little backlit displays and the pre-show video, which is very long. It's a really long pre-show video because you have a lot as a guest you need to know before you ride this ride. So first we're going to tell you the story. And then after we give you a little bit of story, then we're going to tell you about lockers. We got a lot to tell you about how these lockers work. Number one, they're very cool. We told you months ago they were going to be Magic Band activated lockers. They came to fruition. Also, they're two-sided. So similar to Velocicoaster at Islands of Adventure, the next room of the queue, you have several bays of lockers, and whichever ones are lit up and available, you tap your Magic Band. I'm not wearing one today. Magic Band, your card. It's not working with the phone. I don't know if it's going to at any point. And if you don't have either of those, there are cast members in that room that can give you, very similar to when Magic Band was launching, Magic Band, the 2.0 was launching. And you remember Test Track was doing their whole build your own car thing. And if you didn't have it, they were like, or not Magic Band 2, it was just Magic Band. And they were like, well, here, take this white card and go build a car with it. And if you did, you held on this white RFID card and they collect it at the end. That's the same thing they're doing at Tron. They have the white RFID cards. And if you don't have a Magic Band or a pass ticket to use, then they give you one of those. So you just tap the locker, does a little light thing, you pull it open, put your stuff in, make sure you have that card or your Magic Band. Don't put it in the locker because then you can't open it. Put your stuff in, close the locker, does a light, shuts off, and you're ready to move on in the queue. But then the next part of that pre-show video in the room prior is going to be all about loading and going through that complicated load process of this person, you make sure you go around. Don't go over the other bike. Make sure you go around. Get on the bike, put your leg over the bike, pull this, do that, through that whole process. And so you do that, lockers, and then you get into the load area. which is a very big room with some lights, projection surface, and two load stations, which is great because they knew it was going to take people a while to get in. So it's good that we're dual loading for capacity's sake. That's great. And like I said before, those load stations are pretty interesting because when you and your partner get assigned to row 3, you're going to be side by side and not behind each other. Very important to remember that. They expect there to be a decent weight for the front of the vehicle, and so there is, same as Shanghai, there is a little separate lane that goes down both sides, which is the line for the front row, which, given that it was a lot of people's first ride today, a lot of people were waiting for it. Maddie and Eric, who were with us, did that. We rode, I think we were in row 3, the rest of us. And so then it's time to load. You load, I've already talked about the load process a bunch, getting the bike. You go around a little bit and you pull up to that launch scene, which is again in that super amazing room. And the lights, there's countdown and lights, and you fly out of the building. And this is, this is one of those theme park moments you live for. This is why we love this art form, right? It's everything you want it to be. You are on a light cycle for the first time in your life, and these lights and everything going on around you, and the Daft Punk score is pumping, and you fly out of the building on the bike in this big swooping turn through the sky under this canopy, and it is an amazing, amazing moment that is going to be the reason you want to ride this over and over again. The second half of the ride is perfectly enjoyable. There's nothing wrong with it. It's got some fun, tight little turns, some little drops, nothing crazy, but it, there had to be an indoor portion, right? It's Tron, you're going into the grid. So at some point we have to send you into the grid. We can't have you outside the whole time, even though it's fun. You're in the dark, and you see the lights, and you go through the gates, and there's projections and other, flat props with black light and things all throughout the space. And like I said, there's that big, those couple little projection scenes towards the end with the mirror effect where you're battling the red team, and you win the light cycle race. I mean, I don't know. I guess it was a race because we had to get through those 5 gates relatively quickly. But I find that in Tron, usually light cycle race is just trying to kill the other person with the trail off the end of your light cycle. But nonetheless, we survive, hooray, and it's time to exit. There's a decent little bit of track before the exit. So here's where, for me, everything falls apart. There's nothing really wrong with the rest of the experience. Well, actually, let's talk about this. This is something people have said to me before. It's not my personal experience. I want to talk about comfort in the light cycle. Because Eric came off his first ride, and I asked how he liked it. He's like, yeah, it was cool. He's like, but it's just so uncomfortable. He just didn't like the position he was in, and like you got to crane your neck up while you're being pushed down. And I remember the first time I rode it in Shanghai feeling the same. And then I don't know, I feel like I sort of found a more comfortable position and sort of without even realizing it, I think every time I've ridden it since, sort of locking that. So keep that in mind. First rides may not be super comfortable. It's going to depend on your body shape. It's going to depend on your mobility. It's going to depend on a lot of things. It may not be the most comfortable vehicle for everyone. And in that case, it's probably good that it's shorter. It's good that it's not, 2 minutes, 3 minutes, 4 minutes long. It's probably about the length it needs to be. Yeah, it's short. It's not like Rock and Roller. Like, I love Rock and Roller Coaster. Rock and Roller Coaster is super short, shorter than Tron. And there are times I've walked a Rock and Roller Coaster like, if that was a little longer, that'd be great. I never feel that way with Tron. I don't know, like, obviously you want to relive that launch over and over, but you can't. If you just did that same thing over and over, it wouldn't be as cool. So you just need to ride it again. I don't know, it doesn't feel, it is short, but it doesn't, there's no point when I get off of that where I'm like, man, I wish that was 4 minutes longer. That feels right. Feels like the right length. But if it was longer, I think maybe more people would probably complain about being uncomfortable. But again, it's going to depend on age, shape, size, you know, all sorts of things are gonna dictate your comfort in this ride vehicle. I think Flight of Passage is same for a lot of people, right? There's a handful of times in the hundreds of times I've been on Flight of Passage where I was uncomfortable, where one particular station felt so different from any other one I'd sat in, whether it was, I don't know if it was tighter or my legs were up against the console more or whatever the case may be. There's a handful of times where I rode that where it locked in a little different and I was I was in pain. Did you have fun? It's like, no, I was in pain for 4 minutes. Like that wasn't, I don't know what they did to me today, but it wasn't comfortable. So I don't know. That might be the case with Tron. Sometimes your ride, it won't be great. Sometimes it'd be all right. I don't know. We'll have to ride more and see. And hopefully as you guys ride, you'll let us know too. Because it wasn't my experience other than my first ride. But Eric, I'm glad Eric brought it up because I didn't even remember that. Because we were, again, Shanghai, there was only so many rides to do anyway. We were there for 3 days. And so I think we ended up on Tron like 10 or 15 times while we were there. And amazingly, I know the park's supposedly always packed. We ended up there on 2 of the 3 days, the park was empty. Like I remember posting pictures of that 10-minute wait at Tron and everyone on Twitter was just like, what, how? Like there's no one there? I don't understand. So we got really, really lucky when we went. I want to talk about this exit. Talk about this exit a lot. So number one, at the exit station, obviously we're not even supposed, I guess we're supposed to be off of the grid at this point. It's a black room with strong lighting. Doesn't look great. There's like an exit ramp hallway that looks kind of cheapy. It's just black walls with some flat things thrown on it. There's then a really long black hallway with just a shiny piece of plastic in like a Tron pattern on the wall. And the lockers are in the middle of all this. Again, the lockers look great. The lockers are beautiful. Like the fact that they put the identity disc on them and all that stuff, they're cool and they fit in. The stuff that kind of carried over from Shanghai, which is a lot of this exit corridor stuff, it's just oof. And then when you come out, there does appear there's going to be a shop at the exit. We didn't know that. I was kind of surprised that there wasn't going to be. People kept saying it was just going to be at Light and Power Company down the way, but there's definitely a shop space that is very unfinished at this point. It's clearly where a majority of the construction's happening. We assume it's a shop space. I mean, I think in Shanghai, that's actually, some of it's the shop and some of it is the Chevy. I could be wrong. It's sponsored by Chevy there and there's like a post shop. I think it's just gonna be shop. I don't think Enterprise is hosting. I don't know, as a car rental company, what sort of exhibit you would have. So I'm gonna assume that's a shop and I'm guessing that won't be ready until April 4th, if even, because it was black curtains up and looking in, it just looked like there was nothing in it. Absolutely vacant. Like they knew, like that's the last thing we'll finish. We'll worry about it later. Maybe the merchandise hasn't even arrived yet, so it's not even a concern to have the shop ready. My big problem is continuing this exit outside, where the light cycles complete their loop outside and go into the building and into the grid. You enter that show building. You have seen that show building. If you have been to Storybook Circus, you have seen that show building. My biggest problem in Shanghai was that point of the ride too, where like it's a super fun part, and then at the end of it, it's like we're sending you into the grid, and it's clearly just a gray and blue building. Like you have this beautiful canopy. I'm on this light cycle, and I'm just going into this nondescript tunnel in the hole of a box. And it doesn't look thematic, and it doesn't look good, but it survived all of this. Like there was either no budget or no time, or no one wanted to do something different here from the Shanghai one and fix this. It's weird, right? And along the exit are these low concrete walls with sort of Tron patterns in them, which are fine, but you know, they don't block that thing. And then that sort of ends and you can see straight into Storybook Circus as you exit. And it's another one of those cases, just like what everyone's been talking about with Super Nintendo World in Hollywood, where it's like, why didn't you just build the wall a little taller? Why didn't you just make it the fence not see-through? And that's where you sit and wonder as you look at it. You're like, that wouldn't even have cost much to deal with. It's so weird. It's like they made this great effort in the early part in your approach to the queue to immerse you in that world, and you face space, and then when it got to the other side, they were like, they're done. It's fine. It's over. Let's move on. I know there's people saying like none of this matters. Sightlines matter. We were taught to believe in, and these people that work at WDI were absolutely taught that all that stuff matters. Sightlines absolutely matter. To give you a recent example of a little bit of a back and forth between WDI and the client, if you will, which in this case in Florida, the client is Walt Disney World and WDI is the designer. So in the case of Enchanted Tale of Beauty and the Beast at Tokyo Disneyland, the exit path from that attraction, which is in the Beast Castle. The Beast Castle, when you approach it from the entrance, from the queue, it is the Beast Castle as it is at the beginning of the film. The curse is still very much in place. When you exit, the curse is no longer in place. So there are a number of visual obstructions to keep you from seeing the parts of the castle that are sort of run down, again, a little dirty, a little more menacing. When you exit, you come out of the side of the castle, but that side of the castle is clean. And what I thought was the coolest thing is we walk around that corner at the exit, and there's a point at which you can see the paint change. If you look, not easy to see, mind you. But I'm looking sort of through the fence and the trees, and I'm like, you can see the line where the pretty light purple paint ends and it becomes that dark and dirty purple as it rounds the corner of the castle. Now, there was a back and forth between Oriental Land Company, who owns and operates Tokyo Disneyland, and Walt Disney Imagineering, which is a thing that happens, right? WDI is designing for clients, even though in the case of OLC, they're not in the same company. In the case of the other Disney parks, they are. But it still works this way where the client, Oriental Land Company, was like, we would very much like it if there is essentially a photo op, a moment where you can turn back from the exit and see the castle and take a photograph. And Imagineering was like, well, that breaks the story because that would be the dingy, dirty castle. So we've instead designed this big rock cave with a waterfall off the side of it, which is beautiful, by the way, to block that. But OLC, obviously they're the client, it's their decision, makes that change. Either way, we're not looking back at a show building. Like, I get it. It is one of those moments where like WDI fought for story and OLC fought for operations. And both of those things are important, and sometimes one has to win over the other. In the case of the exposed show building for TRON, that's neither one of those, right? There's no way that's what WDI wanted, and there's no way that it was like some big argument from the company that was like, no, we need to see the show building. It wasn't that. It was probably a money thing. Someone probably pitched a change. Maybe someone didn't, but either way, it got left. Everyone saw it. These are things they pre-visualize years in advance in a computer, in the thing they call the dish at WDI, where they can virtually walk around the space and see the sight lines, things like that. That's the reason the dish exists, by the way, is to see what the guest will see. So anyone that tells you like they don't know, they absolutely know what you're going to see before it's even seen. So in the case of TRON, it's if another company that operates a Disney park and resort is still maintaining sightlines. In the case of Tokyo Disney, a lot of their projects still really focusing on that. There are some moments, right, from Toontown, there are some moments with Enchanted Tale of Beauty and the Beast where you see the show building, and I'm not wild about that either. But more of an effort made there than has been made at the U.S. parks, and Universal included in that argument the last couple years. I feel like, I don't know why sightlines have become the thing everyone's like, well, you can sacrifice that now. It's important. It's important. All this time and money and effort is spent on these attractions to put you in the world of that movie or show or whatever, right? And so having these big moments that take you out of the story just undoes all that time and effort and money you spent to begin with. And I don't understand not finishing the job. You guys have spent hundreds of millions of dollars on this ride already. These things I'm nitpicking about are probably not going to break the bank. They're probably not the most expensive little things to do. And when you do them, it shows a thoughtfulness. And I think those are those details that make us Disney fans, when there is that attention to detail, right? when you can turn around in a space and be like, they knew I was going to turn around. They knew I was going to look the other way, and they thought about it. And those, for me, are the most amazing moments in Disney theme park design. Have always been those moments where you stand in a space and you notice things that most people don't, but someone thought to take care of that. And that is still important. Does it ruin TRON Lightcycle Run? No. Does it make it less fun for people? Probably not. These are the values that the company taught fans and its own people were important. And so we have to, when we analyze projects, stick to that, right? And adhere to the rules we've been given. And the rules are that all these things matter. So that's my rant, my little rant on sightlines and theming. But in the end, I will say this. While the exit is kind of lame, TRON Lightcycle Run is a wildly fun ride. It is something I will do every single time I go to Magic Kingdom, if I can get a boarding group, knock on wood, or Lightning Lane or whatever they'll have us do next to ride things. It's incredibly fun. It's a must-do every time. It is wonderful that it replaced nothing. The Magic Kingdom needs more stuff to do. And the fact that they were like, let's clear some land and build another big e-ticket ride. It's the first new e-ticket ride, really. It depends on your definition of e-ticket, right? But the last ride built in the Magic Kingdom was Seven Dwarfs Mine Train. That was 2014. That is now just about 9 years ago. It'll be almost 9 years at the time TRON officially opens. If you don't want to consider that an e-ticket attraction, then you're going back to, man, I don't even know. I mean, Laugh Floor was 07, Filler Magic was 03. Those aren't e-tickets, but I'm just trying to think of things that opened. Magic Kingdom, Stitch's Great Escape, all of these things, not e-tickets. Pooh. I'm in the 90s now, by the way. 98, 97, 96, 95. Splash? Is it Splash? I mean, maybe, again, Alien Encounter I can't put in there either. Splash is like the last real big thrill e-ticket if you don't want to count Mine Train. I count Mine Train. I like Mine Train. I think it's underrated. I think people complain too much about it. But otherwise, it's still, in my lifetime, it's one of the few major additions made to the Magic Kingdom in the 34 years I've been alive. It's a good addition. It's going to make people happy. Super fun, really thrilling. That sensation, being on that bike and that launch portion outside is phenomenal. And thank God that portion exists, because otherwise, I think everyone that walked out of that thing would just be like, the Guardians ride was much better, blah, blah, blah. And don't get me wrong, I love Cosmic Rewind. It's a great attraction. But thank God TRON has so much going for it to where even though it's shorter and technically a little older since it opened in 2016 in Shanghai, that it still holds its own. It has its own merits based on its unique ride system, its IP, its soundtrack, and how well all those things take you into the world of the film. So it's a win. It's undoubtedly a win. There are little things that if I had my way, I would go fix, mostly from the moment you get off the bike through the ultimate exit of the attraction. But in the end, maybe I'm not a big fan of the white tent portion of the queue or the portion of queue that's just white umbrellas that block the view of Space Mountain. And then if you didn't do that, would be just leaving you to roast in the sun. Little things like that. But in the end, the ride itself, portions of the queue are they achieve what they set out to achieve in a good way. Everything, right? So like Star Wars Galaxy's Edge, there's so many people in the comments that go in and they're like, I like Galaxy's Edge, but it's missing so many of the things that I expected, right? And that's the thing my mother said when I took them to Galaxy's Edge for the first time. I was like, did you like, we left the land, and I'm like, did you like it? She's like, I'm a little disappointed. I was like, why? She goes, I don't really know why, and all I can tell you is it's just not what I expected. It's just not what I expected. And I know, like, as we love original storytelling, right? I don't want to discourage theme parks from original storytelling, right? So in the case of Galaxy's Edge, they took a wild swing to put it on a different planet and all of that, and the timeline choices and all those things. They took a big swing, which should be commended. We know they were, Bob Chapek hit them with the pitch before they swung, but so they were a little. The swing was not all it could have been, but the creative people took the swing. That swing didn't necessarily equal all the things that guests expected out of a Star Wars land, whether it was certain characters, certain spaceships, certain things, who would be on the Millennium Falcon with them. Those kind of things aren't there. In the case of Tron, I think whether you're a Megatron fan or just are aware that the franchise exists, it checks the boxes. It's right. I got to ride on a light cycle. Daft Punk music was playing. There were pretty blue lights. It was thrilling and different. All the boxes, thrilling and different doesn't necessarily apply to Tron. I lost my point halfway through. But all the things, all my expectations of a Tron ride are met in that I went into the grid and it was pretty, rode on a light cycle, Daft Punk music. You did it. You did it. There wasn't a long checklist, but you checked everything off, right? So like Millennium Falcon Smuggler's Run, Han Solo's dead, so that's not going to see him. There's only 4 buttons to use, so it's not very interesting. There's only one mission, so it's not really repeatable. There's a lot of X's for that experience, as opposed to like, what should a ride on the Millennium Falcon be like? What are your expectations as a guest based on all the movies and shows and things you've taken in? What do you expect to see? And in the case of Tron, everything you expect to see is there. And sometimes in the case of Galaxy's Edge, everything you expected to see wasn't. So, yeah, I think with Tron, they from the original version to this version, they checked all the boxes, and it's all you can ask. And you guys are going to love it. I think for sure, unless it's super uncomfortable or you have problems getting in the vehicle. Otherwise, I think you're going to love Tron Lightcycle Run at the Magic Kingdom. Again, officially opens on April 4th. And it's exciting to have a new big ride at Magic Kingdom. It's a really exciting thing. If you enjoyed this honest review, you can hit the like button and subscribe for more great content and more honest reviews from me. And as well, if you want to support us and everything we do, you can join the WDWNT Interglobe Society at patreon.com/WDWNT. Thanks for watching, users. I'll see you on the grid.